Have you ever wondered how some people manage to turn impossible situations into stories of victory? Elisha, the prophet who succeeded Elijah, is a powerful example of how unwavering faith can change lives and perform extraordinary miracles. In this video, you will discover how Elisha, through his faith and obedience to God, performed wonders that continue to inspire and teach us today. In the middle of the field, where dust and sweat mixed with daily toil, Elisha was plowing as he did every day. It was a routine he knew well, but that day would be different. He felt a presence, a change in the air. And there was Elijah, a prophet of great renown, someone who carried the presence of the divine in a tangible way. When Elijah approached and threw his cloak over Elisha, the simple gesture carried tremendous weight. It was not just a piece of cloth, but a symbol of a calling, a divine choice that would change his life forever. That cloak on his shoulders represented more than an invitation. It was a challenge, an opportunity to step out of his comfort zone and into something much greater. Elisha, without hesitation, left the oxen and ran after Elijah, feeling in his heart that this was his destiny. How many times in life do we encounter moments that, at first glance, seem simple but carry the potential to transform everything? It is in these moments that we need to be attentive, ready to embrace the unknown. Elisha asked for permission to bid his family farewell before following Elijah. This request shows the importance of family ties and respect for our origins, even when we are about to embark on a new journey. This transition reflects much of what we go through in our daily lives when we need to balance the old and the new. Elisha was not abandoning his family, but rather carrying with him the strength and love he always received from them. Upon returning to his family, Elisha sacrificed the oxen and used the plowing equipment to cook the meat and feed the people. This act of generosity and detachment symbolizes a complete break from his old life. He was ready for something new, without looking back. This story reminds us that to move forward, we often need to let go of what we know. It is a leap of faith that requires courage and determination. Following a divine calling is not an easy decision. Elisha left everything behind, trusting in the path that was opening before him. It is interesting to think about how many times we face similar choices, where we need to set aside our securities to embrace the unknown. This trust is essential for growth and the fulfillment of our greater purposes. Elijah, in turn, understood the importance of his gesture. He was passing the torch to Elisha, ensuring the continuity of his mission. This passing of the mantle is a clear example of mentorship and leadership. When we find someone willing to guide and teach us, we must value this opportunity. Elijah not only called Elisha, but also prepared him for the challenges that would come. Elisha's transition from farmer to prophet was marked by deep symbolism and meaning. He burned his bridges, literally, by sacrificing the oxen and burning the plowing equipment. This demonstrates total commitment, a willingness to fully embrace the new life that lay ahead. This level of commitment is rare, but essential for those who truly wish to make a difference. Elijah's cloak represented more than a calling. It was a constant reminder of the purpose and mission that Elisha now carried. It became a symbol of power and responsibility, something that Elisha would need to honor in his new journey. This symbol reminds us of the importance of recognizing and respecting the gifts and callings we receive in our lives. When Elijah cast his cloak over Elisha, he not only chose a successor, but planted a seed of greatness. Elisha now had the opportunity to grow, learn, and eventually surpass his mentor. This reminds us that true leadership is not about holding on to power, but about empowering others to reach their full potential. Elijah understood this, and by doing so ensured the continuity of his legacy. Elisha accepted the mantle with humility and determination. He was aware of the challenges that would come, but also of the incredible potential this new journey offered. His story inspires us to accept our own callings with the same humility and courage. Sometimes opportunities come unexpectedly, and it is up to us to embrace them wholeheartedly. And so, with Elijah's cloak upon his shoulders, Elisha began his journey. The dust of the field was still on his feet, but his gaze was fixed on the horizon, where new challenges and opportunities awaited him. He was ready to learn, grow, and eventually leave his own mark on the world. Elisha's story was just beginning, and with it a new era of faith and miracles. Elisha followed Elijah, and with each step, he absorbed the knowledge and wisdom of the great prophet. Over the years, he learned about God's ways and witnessed numerous miracles that strengthened his faith. These years were not just about theoretical learning, but practical experiences that shaped his character and prepared him for his future mission. It was as if he was in a school of life, where each day brought a new lesson, a new revelation. One of the most remarkable moments was when Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Elisha watched as Elijah, with unwavering faith, mocked the prophets of Baal for their inability to invoke fire from heaven. With a simple prayer, Elijah brought down the Lord's fire, consuming the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and even the water around the altar. This demonstration of divine power was a milestone, not only for the people of Israel, but also for Elisha, who saw the power of true faith in action. During these years, Elisha was not just a spectator. He served Elijah faithfully, learning to be a servant of God in every sense. This master-apprentice relationship was vital for his development. Every miracle, every piece of advice, every moment of intimacy with Elijah was an opportunity for growth. Elisha was being prepared to take on a role that would require not only faith, but also courage and wisdom. Elijah was a fervent and courageous man. His faith was unbreakable, and his willingness to face challenges was inspiring. Elisha, alongside his mentor, learned the importance of persistence and trust in God. They faced adversities together, and each victory reinforced the certainty that they were on the right path. These years were like a forge, shaping Elisha for the future that God had planned for him. Elisha also learned about the nature of miracles and how they are manifestations of God's power. Every miracle he witnessed was a lesson about divine faithfulness and sovereignty. From the multiplication of the widow's oil to the resurrection of the Shunammite's son, Elisha saw that miracles were not just demonstrations of power, but also acts of compassion and mercy. He understood that his role would be to be a channel through which God's love and justice would flow. Living with Elijah was not without challenges. Elisha had to deal with doubts and fears, like any other human being. However, he learned that true strength comes from dependence on God. Faith is not the absence of doubts, but the courage to move forward despite them. This was one of the most valuable lessons Elisha learned, and he would carry it with him for the rest of his life. Elisha also had the opportunity to see Elijah's leadership in action. He saw how Elijah guided the people, confronted kings, and remained faithful to the divine mission. This direct observation of leadership was crucial for Elisha, who would one day have to take on a similar role. He learned that spiritual leadership requires more than knowledge. It requires a dedicated heart and a willingness to serve the people with love and justice. These years of learning were also times of deep introspection for Elisha. He reflected on what he saw and experienced, seeking to understand the purpose behind each event. These reflections helped him develop a clear vision of his mission and mentally prepare for future challenges. Elisha was being prepared not only to perform miracles, but to be a spiritual leader and an example of faith. In addition to miracles, Elisha learned about the importance of prayer and communion with God. He saw how Elijah depended on divine guidance for every decision and action. This total dependence on God was a powerful example for Elisha, who understood that prayer was the key to an effective life of service. He learned that true strength and wisdom come from an intimate relationship with God. Finally, these years of learning culminated in complete preparation for the mission that Elisha was about to assume. He had grown, learned, and was ready to follow in his mentor's footsteps. The time beside Elijah was an essential period of formation that equipped him with the necessary tools to be a powerful and effective prophet. Elisha's journey was just beginning, and he was prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead. The day of Elijah's departure was one of the most extraordinary in Elisha's life. Knowing that his time had come, Elijah asked Elisha to stay while he went to Bethel. However, Elisha, aware of the importance of that moment, insisted on accompanying him, declaring his loyalty. It was a significant journey, and Elisha knew that his master was about to leave this world in an extraordinary way. So they went together to Bethel and later to Jericho until they reached the Jordan. Along the way, the sons of the prophets warned Elisha about Elijah's imminent departure. Elisha, with silent determination, asked them to keep quiet. He did not want to divert his attention from that crucial moment. Finally, upon reaching the Jordan, Elijah performed one last miracle before Elisha. He took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the waters, which divided, allowing both to cross on dry ground. This miracle was not just an act of power, but a symbolic preparation for the transition that was about to happen. Elijah then asked Elisha what he wanted before being taken. Elisha, with a clear vision of his future, requested a double portion of Elijah's spirit. This request was not out of arrogance, but a deep understanding of the responsibility he was about to assume. Elijah responded that if Elisha saw him when he was taken, it would be so. And as they were talking, a chariot of fire with horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. Elijah ascended to heaven in a whirlwind, and Elisha, seeing this, cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen." With a heavy heart and full of emotion, Elisha tore his clothes in mourning. He then took Elijah's mantle, which had fallen, and returned to the Jordan. Elisha repeated his master's act, striking the waters with the mantle and asking, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" The waters parted again, confirming that Elijah's spirit now rested upon Elisha. This marked the beginning of his ministry, symbolizing the transfer of prophetic power. The sons of the prophets, seeing Elisha cross the Jordan, recognized that Elijah's spirit rested upon him. They came to meet him and bowed before him. This public recognition was crucial for Elisha's acceptance as the new spiritual leader. He was not just a successor, he was now the bearer of the mantle, both literally and figuratively. With this new mantle came great responsibility and immense power. Elisha, now with Elijah's mantle, began his journey as Israel's prophet. He was aware of the weight of his new position, but also of the immense honor of following in Elijah's footsteps. This mantle represented the continuity of divine work, and Elisha was determined to be a faithful channel through which God could operate. Elijah's departure marked the end of an era, but also the beginning of a new journey full of promises and challenges. Every step Elisha took was now guided by his mentor's example. He was determined to keep the flame of faith alive and continue the work Elijah had started. This determination was reflected in his future actions and miracles. Elisha knew that the same divine presence that was with Elijah was now with him. This knowledge gave him the confidence to face any challenge that arose. The power transition between Elijah and Elisha teaches us about the importance of continuity and preparation. Elijah not only performed great deeds but also prepared Elisha to continue his work. This careful preparation ensured that the divine mission was not interrupted. Elisha, in turn, demonstrated that he was up to the challenge, showing an unwavering commitment to his calling. The moment of Elijah's ascension to heaven is one of the most powerful and symbolic events in the Scriptures. It represents not only the departure of a great prophet, but also the confirmation that God continues to work through his servants. Elisha, with his request for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, shows his desire to be fully equipped for the task ahead. This desire for more of the Spirit reminds us that to achieve great things, we need to seek a deep connection with the divine. The story of Elisha and Elijah is a narrative of legacy and continuity. Elijah's ascension and Elisha's receipt of the mantle show us that even when a great leader departs, his work can continue through those he prepared. Elisha, now full of Elijah's spirit, was ready to assume his role and continue God's work in Israel. And so, with Elijah's mantle upon his shoulders, he began to write his own story of faith and miracles. Elisha, now invested with Elijah's mantle, began performing miracles that demonstrated God's power in impressive ways. One of his first acts was healing the waters in Jericho. The inhabitants of the city suffered because the waters were bad and the land unproductive. Elisha asked for a new bowl with salt, and upon throwing the salt into the water source, he declared, "Thus says the Lord, I have healed these waters. Never again will they cause death or barrenness." This miracle transformed the lives of Jericho's inhabitants, showing that even the most mundane aspects can be transformed with faith. On another occasion, Elisha demonstrated divine providence by multiplying a widow's oil. This woman, desperate because her creditors threatened to take her children as slaves, sought Elisha's help. Elisha told her to borrow as many empty vessels as she could find and begin pouring her small flask of oil into them. Miraculously, the oil flowed until all the vessels were filled. This miracle not only paid the widow's debts, but also provided her with sustenance for the future, demonstrating that faith and obedience to God's word can bring abundance in times of need. Elisha also had the power to raise the dead, as in the case of the Shunammite woman's son. This woman, who had shown great hospitality towards Elisha, received the promise of a son despite her old age. Years later, the child fell ill and died. The woman, with unwavering faith, sought Elisha, who came and lay upon the child, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he did so, the child sneezed 7 times and came back to life. This miracle not only restored joy to a family but also reaffirmed the community's faith in God's power. Another significant miracle was the healing of Naaman, the commander of the Syrian army. Naaman suffered from leprosy, a feared and stigmatizing disease. An Israeli slave girl suggested he seek Elisha for healing. Elisha, without even meeting Naaman, sent a message for him to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. Initially reluctant, Naaman finally obeyed and was completely healed. This miracle transcended borders, showing that God's power was available to all who believed and obeyed, regardless of their nationality. Elisha also performed miracles in more everyday situations, such as when he made an iron axe head float after it had fallen into the river. This act, though minor compared to other miracles, showed that God cares about the details of our lives and is willing to intervene even in seemingly small problems. This miracle taught Elisha's disciples and us that we should never underestimate divine help in any situation. On one occasion, Elisha fed 100 men with only 20 barley loaves and some ears of grain. This miracle of multiplication demonstrates God's power to provide abundantly from limited resources. Each time Elisha performed a miracle, he not only addressed an immediate need, but also strengthened the faith of those who witnessed God's power in action. These acts of provision and multiplication were constant reminders that with God, there is always enough. Elisha also demonstrated God's power by thwarting the plans of the king of Syria, who was trying to ambush the army of Israel. Elisha, with the gift of prophecy, warned the king of Israel about the ambushes, repeatedly frustrating the enemy's plans. This divine intervention not only protected the people of Israel, but also showed that God was actively involved in defending his people. Elisha, as a prophet, was a key instrument in this divine protection. Another notable miracle was the purification of a poisonous stew. During a famine, a group of prophets was preparing stew with wild herbs, unaware that some were poisonous. Realizing the danger, they called out to Elisha, who added flour to the stew, making it safe to eat. This miracle underscores that God not only cares about our great needs, but also our daily and basic needs, such as food. Elisha also performed miracles that demonstrated God's justice and severity, such as when he cursed some youths who mocked him, resulting in 2 bears coming out of the woods and mauling 42 of them. This event, though severe, highlighted the importance of respecting God's servants and taking divine holiness seriously. It was a reminder that God's power can be a force of both mercy and judgment. Through all these miracles, Elisha showed that God's power was alive and active in Israel. Each act of healing, provision, and justice reaffirmed the people's faith and demonstrated that God was present in their everyday lives. Elisha, as a prophet, was a channel through which God demonstrated his love and power in tangible and transformative ways. Through his ministry, the people of Israel had their hopes renewed and their faith strengthened. Elisha, as a prophet, not only performed miracles, but also played a crucial role as a spiritual guide and leader in times of confrontation. One of the most notable moments of his ministry was when he healed Naaman, the commander of the Syrian army, of his leprosy. Naaman, desperate to find a cure, traveled to Israel in search of Elisha. Instead of meeting him personally, Elisha sent a messenger with instructions to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. Initially offended, Naaman eventually obeyed and was completely healed. This act not only showed God's healing power but also taught Naaman about humility and obedience. Elisha also played a vital role in thwarting the plans of the king of Syria. This king, furious that his ambushes against Israel always failed, suspected there was a traitor among his ranks. However, one of his servants informed him that Elisha, the prophet in Israel, was revealing his plans to the king of Israel. In an attempt to capture Elisha, the king of Syria sent a great army to surround the city where Elisha was. But Elisha calmly prayed for God to open his servant's eyes, and he saw that the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire around Elisha. This episode demonstrated that divine protection was always present, even in the most dangerous situations. When the Syrians approached to capture Elisha, he prayed for God to blind them. Cleverly, Elisha guided them to Samaria, where he prayed again for them to regain their sight. Finding themselves surrounded by the Israeli army, the Syrians were defenseless. The king of Israel, seeing the situation, asked Elisha if he should kill them, but Elisha advised him to feed them and let them go. This act of mercy and wisdom not only saved lives, but also disarmed hostility and demonstrated that God's power could transform even enemies. Elisha continued his ministry by guiding kings and advising during crises. During a severe famine caused by the Syrian siege of Samaria, the king of Israel, desperate, blamed Elisha and swore to kill him. Elisha, at his house with the elders, predicted that the famine would end the next day, and it happened. 4 lepers, desperate, found the Syrian camp abandoned. The Syrians, terrified by noises they believed were from a great army, had fled, leaving everything behind. Elisha's prophecy was fulfilled, once again proving that God's word through the prophet was powerful and true. Elisha also had to face situations of injustice and correct them. A widow, whose husband was one of the sons of the prophets, went to Elisha because her creditors threatened to take her sons as slaves. Elisha, with compassion and wisdom, multiplied the widow's oil, allowing her to sell it and pay her debts. This miracle not only saved the family from despair, but also showed how God's justice and providence operate in everyday lives. Another critical moment was when Elisha dealt with Gehazi, his servant, who succumbed to the temptation of greed. After Naaman's healing, Gehazi deceitfully asked for gifts in Elisha's name. Confronting him, Elisha declared that Naaman's leprosy would cling to Gehazi and his descendants forever. This severe consequence underscored the importance of integrity and honesty in serving God. Gehazi's story serves as a warning about the dangers of materialism and dishonesty. Elisha also guided during times of war. On one occasion, he advised the king of Israel about the movements of the Syrian army, thus avoiding numerous ambushes. His ability to foresee and counter the enemy's tactics not only protected Israel, but also reinforced the king's and the people's confidence in divine guidance. This strategic guidance demonstrated that God's wisdom could be applied to both spiritual matters and practical and military issues. Moreover, Elisha helped preserve the lives and well-being of the sons of the prophets. When a pot of stew was inadvertently poisoned, Elisha purified the food by adding flour, making it safe to consume. This minor miracle showed that God cares about our daily needs and that his prophets are channels of his continuous provision. Elisha also demonstrated his spiritual authority when he confronted youths who mocked him, calling him bald. In response, he cursed them, and 2 bears came out of the forest and mauled 42 of them. This severe event underscored the importance of respecting divine authority and showed that blasphemy and disobedience were not tolerated. Finally, Elisha continued to guide and influence kingdoms, using his prophetic gift to counsel and direct during crises. His ministry was not only about visible miracles, but also about silent wisdom and constant guidance. The power and authority he exercised were evident not only in the great divine manifestations, but also in the daily decisions that shaped the lives of the people of Israel. Elisha, in addition to performing great miracles, also operated in smaller events that demonstrated God's attention even to the everyday needs of his people. One of these miracles occurred when a group of prophets was building a new dwelling, and the iron head of an axe fell into the water. For many, this might seem like an insignificant problem, but for those men, losing the borrowed tool was a great distress. Elisha, showing that no problem is too small for God, threw a piece of wood into the water and made the iron float. This miracle reminds us that God cares about all aspects of our lives, not just the big challenges. Another significant event was when Elisha multiplied 20 barley loaves to feed 100 men. This miracle resembles the one performed by Jesus centuries later, feeding thousands with a few loaves and fish. Elisha demonstrated that God can do much with little, and that his provision is always sufficient. These small miracles not only solved immediate problems, but also strengthened the people's faith and showed that God was present and active in their daily lives. During a severe famine, the sons of the prophets were gathered with Elisha, and someone put poisonous herbs in the stew. Realizing the danger, Elisha added flour to the pot, purifying the food and making it safe to eat. This miracle teaches us that God can transform danger into safety and provide for the needs of His people, even in the most desperate situations. It is a reminder that we should trust God in all circumstances, knowing that He can deliver us from evil in unexpected ways. Elisha also helped a community of prophets build a new dwelling. While they were cutting wood, the head of a borrowed axe fell into the water. Elisha asked where it had fallen, cut a piece of wood, and threw it at the indicated spot, making the iron float. This small miracle showed that faith and obedience can result in miraculous solutions to practical problems. It reinforces the idea that God is always present, even in the most common and everyday tasks. On another occasion, Elisha healed poisonous waters in the city of Jericho. The waters were bad and caused death and barrenness. Elisha asked for a new bowl with salt and threw it into the source, purifying the waters and ensuring they would never cause harm again. This miracle reminds us that God has the power to transform even the most desperate situations into sources of life and blessing. It is a call to trust in God's transformative power, even when facing difficult circumstances. Elisha also performed miracles of provision, such as when a widow in debt and about to lose her sons as slaves sought his help. He multiplied her small flask of oil, allowing her to fill numerous vessels and sell the oil to pay her debts and live on the remainder. This multiplication miracle teaches us that God can transform our limited resources into abundance when we trust Him and obey His instructions. The resurrection of the Shunammite woman's son was another miracle that demonstrated God's power through Elisha. The boy, who died suddenly, was brought back to life when Elisha prayed and stretched himself over him. This act of compassion and power reaffirmed the woman's and her family's faith, showing that God is Lord over life and death. This miracle also strengthened the community's faith, seeing Elisha as a true man of God, capable of bringing life where there was death. Furthermore, Elisha played a crucial role in times of war, using his prophetic gift to reveal the enemy's plans and protect Israel. On one occasion, he revealed to the king of Israel the ambushes planned by the king of Syria, thwarting the attacks and protecting the people. This practical use of the prophetic gift showed that God's wisdom could be applied in all areas of life, including the defense of a nation. Elisha demonstrated that with divine guidance, it is possible to overcome even the most complex challenges. Elisha also showed the importance of respect and reverence for divine authority. When a group of youths mocked him, calling him bald, Elisha cursed them, and 2 bears came out of the forest and attacked 42 of them. This event, although severe, served as a reminder of the seriousness of disrespecting God's servants. It is a call to recognize and honor the holiness and authority that God places in His leaders and prophets. Finally, Elisha continued to perform miracles that reaffirmed God's continuous and active presence in Israel. Each act of provision, healing, and protection served to strengthen the people's faith and remind them that God was with them at all times. Elisha, as a faithful servant, was a channel through which God demonstrated His love, power, and constant care. These small miracles, although less grandiose, were equally important in the people's daily lives, showing that God cares about all aspects of their lives. Elisha, throughout his ministry, frequently reflected on the responsibilities and weight of being a prophet of God. He understood that being a channel of divine power was not an easy task. Every miracle, prophecy, and decision carried immense responsibility. Elisha knew that his actions not only affected his life, but also the lives of all the people of Israel. This awareness kept him humble and dependent on divine wisdom in all circumstances. One of Elisha's deepest reflections arose after the resurrection of the Shunammite woman's son. He understood that he had been merely an instrument in God's hands, and that miracle was not a reflection of his own power, but of divine compassion and love. Elisha reflected on the nature of faith, both his and the Shunammite woman's, who had shown unwavering trust in God even in the midst of tragedy. This experience reinforced in Elisha the importance of maintaining firm faith and total dependence on God. Elisha's responsibility also manifested in his leadership. He often guided the kings of Israel in times of crisis, providing divine counsel that often saved the nation. Elisha understood that his wisdom came from God, and that his position of influence was a call to serve with integrity and justice. He reflected on how his words and actions could impact not only the leaders, but also all the people. This motivated him to constantly seek divine guidance before making any decision. Elisha also faced moments of deep introspection when confronted with the disobedience and lack of faith of others. The incident with Gehazi, his servant, who lied and succumbed to greed, was a clear example. Elisha saw how corruption and dishonesty could bring severe consequences, not only for the individual, but for their future generations. This episode made him reflect on the importance of teaching and exemplifying integrity and honesty, not just through words, but also through concrete actions. Elisha's humility was evident in his reaction to the smaller miracles, such as making the axe head float or purifying the poisonous stew. He knew that even these small acts of divine intervention were significant and showed God's constant provision and care. Elisha reflected on how each miracle, big or small, was an opportunity to strengthen people's faith and remind them of God's active presence in their daily lives. Elisha also pondered the challenges and difficulties of the prophetic ministry. He knew that being a prophet often meant being in situations of great emotional and spiritual tension. The line between justice and mercy, between truth and compassion, was often delicate. Elisha reflected on how to balance these responsibilities, always seeking God's wisdom and guidance to make the right decisions. He understood that every action of his should reflect God's character, showing both his justice and his love. Moments of solitude and introspection were crucial for Elisha. He knew that to be an effective leader, he needed times of silence and communion with God. These periods of reflection allowed him to recharge his strength and renew his vision. Elisha often meditated on the scriptures and prayed for discernment, seeking to align himself with God's will. He knew that his ability to guide and serve the people depended on his constant connection with God. Elisha also cared about the legacy he would leave behind. He reflected on how his actions and teachings would impact future generations. Elisha knew that his ministry was not limited to his lifetime, but that his words and deeds could inspire and guide future generations of leaders and prophets. He sought to live in a way that his legacy would be a lasting testimony to God's faithfulness and power. Elisha's interaction with the kings and leaders of Israel was also a point of reflection. He understood the complexity of dealing with power and politics, and how his words could influence critical decisions. Elisha reflected on how to maintain his integrity and speak the truth, even when it was unpopular or dangerous. He knew that his role was to be God's voice, offering divine guidance and correction, regardless of personal consequences. Finally, Elisha reflected on the nature of his calling and the journey that had brought him there. He thought about how God had prepared him through his experiences with Elijah, and how each challenge and victory had shaped his character and ministry. Elisha recognized that his journey was a testimony to God's grace and faithfulness. He knew that just as he had been guided and prepared, he should now be a guide and mentor to others, ensuring that God's work continued through the next generations. As we conclude our journey through the life and miracles of Elisha, it becomes clear that each of us carries an immense responsibility on our shoulders. Elisha showed us that faith, courage, and humility are essential to face the challenges that arise on our path. He not only performed great miracles, but also taught us that God is present even in the smallest details of our lives. Now stop and reflect. How can you apply these teachings in your daily life? Perhaps you are facing a situation that seems impossible, like the widow who had no way to pay her debts. Or maybe you are seeking guidance and clarity, like Naaman looking for healing from his leprosy. The key is to trust and seek divine guidance, just as Elisha did. Ask yourself, am I willing to trust God in small and big things? Am I ready to set aside my insecurities and take steps of faith? Elisha showed us that with divine guidance, we can overcome any obstacle and see miracles happen in our lives. And now, a special invitation for you. Subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. Continue learning and being inspired by stories of faith and miracles. Don't miss the opportunity to grow spiritually and strengthen your faith by following our videos and content. Which of Elisha's miracles inspired you the most? Leave your comment and share your reflections. We want to hear from you. And remember, with faith and determination, you too can be a channel of blessings in the lives of those around you.